I want you to take a moment to think, what exactly is anxiety? We hear the term anxiety a lot. What exactly is anxiety? Just take a moment to think, why do we have anxiety? Why do you think in the audience we have anxiety in certain situations? And think of situations in your own life, in sport, maybe in business, presenting during interviews, where you have had anxiety and you felt that had you not had that anxiety, you could have done a lot better. If you haven't already done so, get a pen and paper and join in. I'll give you a minute to get your pen and paper, get someone to make a coffee or a tea for you, and come back and play ball. To get the most of this seminar, you need to join in and participate in the exercises to retain information. We're doing a lot of information tonight in a very small space of time. I'm doing literally 3 or 4 days worth of information packed into an hour. So time is of the essence. So get a pen and paper and join in. And think about why we have anxiety in certain situations and what exactly is anxiety. Because tonight we're going to demonstrate and look at ways for you to be able to function at your optimum level in performance. And you can also transfer these skills across to business and other areas of your life as well. Not just focus on sports. If you're a coach in the audience, a teacher, a presenter, anything for that matter, this will come into really, really good effect for you. If you're an athlete yourself, a football or whatever, then it's going to be a very powerful seminar we're going to cover. You really enjoy it and get a lot out of it. Let's start the story before we move on and answer the questions that I put out there to you earlier. A few years ago, to illustrate how powerful what we're going to do tonight is, I had this mum phone me up, sent me an email and said, can you work with my daughter? She's got severe anxiety about competing. And I thought, well, okay, nothing new to me. I've worked for many, many years with many of the best athletes in the world and sports people across a broad range of areas. Nothing really new. Yet this situation was a different type of situations. She was only a teenager and she suffered very severe anxiety. And her anxiety was focused on trampolining. She was a trampoline athlete. She competed in trampolining. And she wanted to give up participating in the sport that she did since she was maybe 2 or 3 years old, from what I'm led to believe. And she was suffering severe anxiety. Could you imagine suffering some severe, debilitating anxiety when you felt like giving up your sport? Or if you're a coach, a therapist, your client, that's pretty severe and debilitating. When I explore a little bit more, as it happens, from what I'm told, one of her colleagues was on a trampoline and he burst a leg. Actually burst a leg physically, from what I was told. And from that moment, she developed a very severe anxiety to the point that she didn't want to compete no more. She felt that was it. And from what I'm led to believe, from what her mum said, she tried everything to get better, but didn't really improve. Until she came along and saw me, and we did some work on her. And some of what I'm going to do, I'm going to touch on tonight. And you can take this away and use if you're a coach with your clients, if you're a therapist with your clients, if you're an athlete with yourself, if you want to. It's entirely up to you. The moral story is, and the way the story ends, we did some of the work we did tonight over a period of time, and she went back into competing. Not only did she go back into competing, she actually went on to win medals at a very high level, at national and I believe possibly international level. I'm going to protect the name because of confidentiality, but it was on the paper, or the papers anyway. So I just want to illustrate how powerful these techniques will be. And it only took a short space of time, a few weeks, 3 or 4 sessions of working with me for her to go back from complete debilitation, wanting to give up, to getting her feet back on the ground and competing. At the highest level, by the way. At the highest level. And you can do your research, you can Google the story, it's out there. I'll protect the name because of confidentiality. You're going to Google it, you can read up on it, and show you how powerful these techniques are. Over many, many years, I've had the privilege of working with many, many great athletes across a broad range of areas. The highest level athletes. And I'm not going to go on too much about myself this evening because we've got such a short space of time to cover so much. But where did it all begin for me? I get the question asked me, Jim, where did it all begin for you? Because a lot of people out there probably watching the show when they get into sport, you're probably at uni, possibly, or college, or studying, or you might just want to go into sport for whatever reason. I want to share with you where it all began for me. Where it literally all began for me was in the mid to late 90s. I was working as a conditioning coach in London. And as I was working as a conditioning coach in London, I had individual clients from different disciplines. We'd work with clients who range from looking to lose a little bit of weight, right through to elite athletes and footballers. One of my clients who I took under my wing for about 6 months to do conditioning training, I underpinned a lot of the conditioning work with psychology, NLP, CBT, which we're going to cover this evening, through a conversational way to help increase his confidence and build him up psychologically as well as physically. So I'd work with him literally once a week, and that's pretty much where it all began for me. He was a Premiership player. I'd incorporate some of the techniques that we're going to cover tonight that I've taken from my best-selling book. There's a bit of a plug for the book. If you haven't got it, it's worth getting it. And some of the stuff from the CBT stuff I've done as well. Yeah, there was Carlo Nash, and if you're watching Carlo anywhere, remember all those years ago, I was at 97, 98, you were at Crystal Palace, and I was working at that centre over in Surrey. Had all the different footballers coming in from different Premiership clubs as well. And we used to do some conditioning work every week, mainly weight training, and little did probably realise that over them 6 or 7 months, we were doing a lot of psychological work as well, a lot of conversational hypnosis and NLP, which is really, really powerful stuff. And if you're watching, you probably reflect on it now and think that's what he was doing all along. And the key was, how do we do it? Well, a lot of ways, just to increase the weight you could lift, the strength, the plyometric. The mind and body link, we're going to cover that more today. The mind and body, there's a link between the two, which we're going to talk about more this evening. Yet in saying that, not only with the strength program, doing the bench pressing, if you remember, record bench pressing and all like, we also incorporated that with targets every week and underpinned physiologically with psychology. So if you're a conditioning coach out there, NLP and CBT is a fantastic tool to incrementally improve your client's ability. Now, the buck didn't stop there. I'd worked with people obviously before Carlo at a very high level. Yet in saying that, that was pretty much where I really started to, and I was an athlete myself by the way, but that was pretty much where I started to really underpin a lot of my work with NLP. And the rest is history, as I say. I'm not going to go on about my story. You can read my story. I've worked with a lot of different teams and clubs and professional athletes and footballers many years. I just mentioned this story because that's pretty much where the pivotal moment. Carlo was actually released, I believe, from a professional club. He went to Clitheroe only, and he came across the Palace. And I felt in my mind that when he was at Palace, playing for Crystal Palace Football Club in the Premier League in '98, I think it were, and my colleague was the head conditioning coach there. If you're watching too, enjoy tonight's show. And I'd help him out, obviously, and we'd have individual players that would come to the centre, not just from Palace, from other clubs as well. Now, with Carlo, I felt that because he was released and being brought in from the non-league into Premiership football, I felt personally there would be some psychological things in his mind. So a lot of time I do some conversational hypnosis, NLP, and all the like, really to help him function at an optimum level. Carlo obviously went on to do really well. I believe I've not really kept in touch with him as you do with a lot of clients, but seen many clients for many years. So that's where it all began for me. So I've been in this field for many, many years, probably longer than what some of you guys were born. Some of you guys are probably born after I started doing some of this stuff in the field of sport, professional sport. Yet in saying that, we've got to start somewhere, and I'm sure you'll take a lot away from tonight's seminar. A really interesting thing I want to point to you. I did a little research a few years ago when I was working as a performance coach at Bury FC. Any of the guys at Bury watching? Good evening, guys. Some research I did at the time. Fantastic, I really enjoyed my time there. We produced a lot of good players. Some of the players are probably watching this evening. Fantastic lads who've gone to the Premiership. You know who you are. And it was a fantastic time at the club. Yet, as well as restructuring the youth system there to go on to do well, we also had to keep the first team up. When I joined the first team, they were 10 points bottom of the league. So the key was to keep them up. And I felt that psychologically we had to underpin the work with physiological ways. But interesting, I did a bit of research while we were there. And the research did, we played Everton one game, the pre-season game, and I asked the Everton conditioning coach, I think it was Bill Ellis, if you're watching there, and what I asked him to do was to attach heart rate monitors on 3 or 4 of the players from both teams. Because what I wanted to see psychologically, what the response was heart rate wise before the game and during the game. And quite interestingly, before the game, the players from Bury who we attached the monitor to, as you can see from the graph, you can download these articles on peak performance. I wrote an article on peak performance, or you can email me. I should have it somewhere, albeit I think peak performance is the rights to it now. And the key was that when we started the game, our players at Bury were a lot higher heart rate than the guys at Everton. I was wondering, is it because nature nurtures? Is it because our guys were physiologically not as physically conditioned as they were a really good pre-season? That said, they didn't kick the ball, they didn't run in anger. So I felt that it couldn't have been that. So I thought maybe psychologically, the fact that they're playing a Premiership club and maybe in their own mind had more of a point to prove was significant in the build-up, even though it was just a friendly. Because the guys at Everton were like 30, 40 beats per minute less. They were a resting heart rate about 60, 70 really before the game. Our guys were about 130, 140, and I thought that's quite interesting really. But during the game, what's even more interesting is your physiologist out there. The recovery ratio of the lads at Everton was far more significant than our guys. Our guys sort of stayed in around about the 170, 180, maybe got to about 180, 190 beats per minute, and fluctuated about 140, 150, about 30, 40 beats differential. The lads at Everton went from about 180 to about 100, so they're kind of in cruise control, even though I think in the end we might have drawn and just lost the game. I can't remember what the result was now. It was a very close result. Yeah, the result didn't matter. It was about getting our players to perform in the friendly. The interesting thing is that the heart rate differential, and that's what we only don't know how hard our players work. Our players work really hard as well physically. I would think, the great work Everton did as a conditioning coach there as well, I'm sure had a lot to do with it too. But I think really psychologically it would have had a part to play in it as well, really. The adrenaline of playing a higher league team and maybe playing players that you see on TV quite regularly. I don't know, I guess we can't really confirm what it is, maybe a cocktail of all the things, but I want to take that away because it's really significant as we sort of go on throughout the seminar how different situations can present themselves in sport, because obviously the higher heart rate is, the more challenging it's going to be mentally to a certain point. So I guess recovery is really key in multi-functional sports, your football, your rugby and all the like really. So if your conditioning coach out there, recovery work's key, but if your conditioning coach work with a psychologist or a sports performance coach or whatever they call them these days, because you really will do significantly better than if you don't. Anyway, we move on. So I say mental fitness is key. What people say to me, Jim, what's more important? Physical, mental, nutrition? They're all important. There's no one more important than the other. But think about mental. The mental side of the game isn't just the ability to be confident and motivated and psychological demands. It's also the ability to technically, we've got to see our techniques when we kick a ball. Technically, striking a ball, we hit a tennis, backhand, or we serve, or we do the trampoline. Technically, it's in the mind, and psychologically, the tactical awareness of the game is key too. So that's, you've got to argue that being psychologically as well. So mental training, you've got to keep doing it. I see certain teams bring a psychologist in or sports performance coach in when a team's really struggling. I say bring one in when a team is up there. If you wait until the team is struggling, sometimes it can be too late. Not saying that's not a good thing, I'm just saying that if you're a professional club out there, bring someone in. There's plenty of people out there that will do a job for next to nothing, even not devaluing the work that they do, just to get a start in the game. I used to bring players when I worked at different football clubs on work experience from universities to help them get an insight. And some of you guys that are probably watching tonight who came on board work experience with me have gone on to working pro clubs, and some of the lads gone to work everywhere, even Premiership clubs. So you've got to do your hard yards somewhere. And if you're a conditioning coach out there, your psychologist out there, your NLP or whatever, CBT, if you can spare the time and effort, get into the club, even at amateur level, and offer you services once a week, which is key. But if you don't carry on doing mental training, you're going to, what we call degenerate. Just like nutrition, you don't eat one good meal and you're in great shape. You don't, for example, do one physical training session and then you're out there, you're buff and strong. You've got to keep doing it. So I did the mental training. So make time for mental skills training. Even if it's like 1 or 2 times a week, you get out what you put in. We're going to talk about things you can do in tonight's seminar, which is key. So who would you say the most important person you can communicate to is? Who? If you said self, you're right. You are the most important person you'll ever communicate to. And why is that, you might ask? Because you think about it. How many times have you had a conversation with yourself? Or how many times have you had a conversation with somebody who's not even there? So you could be driving the car home and you're talking to someone who's not even there. As long as you don't do it too loud, you're okay. Yet in saying that, the key is really self-communication. And what I mean by that, how do you respond in certain situations? Example, your partner leaves a note, you come home and they're gone. You come home and you're demoralised for the next 10 years, you don't go out, you're depressed, you're sad, all that sort of stuff. But you come home and think, good riddance, thank God you're gone, I'll find someone else. Maybe not as condescending in that, but you realise, you know what, if they don't want to leave me, well, it's probably best they're gone. I'll get my life back, I'll do a course, I'll study, I'll go out there and reinvent myself and I'll put my attention in a different direction. So self-communication is key. We get released from a football club or any sport for that matter. You fail, what do? Do you give up like some people do, or do you look at other options and train again and wait for the next opportunities? I know a lot of players, especially in football, they get released and that's the end of the world for them. End of the world. They don't bother anymore. But the other players, that they pick themselves back up again and they reinvent themselves, and when the opportunity comes up, they're ready to take it. And that's the key, to be ready for every opportunity. So self-communication, when you look at today, is key. Very briefly, I'm going to illustrate the following CBT model we're going to refer to this evening. CBT, cognitive therapy. Cognitive is just thought, behaviour. Therapy is obviously, CBT is a therapy which is in the now. It's a type of therapy that deals with the now rather than goes into the past in any great detail. But I'm not going to go into too much detail. If you want any more information on CBT, email me. If you tune in this seminar and you sign up for it, I would have emailed you the CBT guide that I wrote. If you haven't got that, email me. I'll send it to you. You can read more on CBT. We haven't got really much time to go into too much detail, but I'm going to sort of touch on what we call the ABC model, and it was developed by Aaron Beck, one of the forefathers of CBT. And what he said was, we have an activating event, so it's the event, and our beliefs about the event, irrational, good and bad. Some beliefs are good, some obviously are bad, some are rational, irrational in the context of our outcome we want to achieve. And then we have a set of consequences. And those consequences manifest themselves behaviourally, thoughts, and also physiologically as well, by the way. So in plain English, you have an event, whatever the event might be, and then you have thoughts about the event. Like I mentioned before, when the partner leaves you, you have a belief about what the situation is going to entail. I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life, and no one will want me. And then that has an impact in you psychologically, your thoughts, you emotionally, your feeling, and physiologically as well. Okay, so whatever that might be, so it could be a big sporting event. We're going to refer to that this evening in more detail. That could be the event. And you could see it as a challenge, or you could see it as a frightening situation. And that will impact your thoughts. So, for example, someone takes a penalty for a penalty shootout. That could be the event, and they think, well, what if I miss? And if I miss, what's going to happen? Emotionally, they start feeling anxious. Behaviourally, they start clamping up and going to tight. So that sort of gives you an illustration of how the ABC model works. And the reason we talk about the ABC model is because I'm going to illustrate that throughout the evening to talk more about how we can use the model in sport, but we can also use other interventions, not just CBT, NLP and other stuff as well. So it's not the event to surmise, it's our interpretation of the event, which is obviously key. And then we have our beliefs about the event, how we evaluate the event, whether we want to call it irrational or rational. In Jim's world, I don't think there's any irrational or rational, it's only what works for you. So if you believe it, it's true, it has some reality. That's just Jim's world. So what we need to do in Jim's world, we use another therapeutic intervention. We meet you in your reality and guide you out of that, but that's another story for another day. And finally, you have consequences, how you feel, what you think, your thoughts, and physically, we have an impact as well. Okay, so our thoughts, emotions, and behavior are all interlinked. Okay, and sometimes if you correct one, the other ones can correct themselves as well. But we'll talk more about that in a little bit more detail as we go along. So just to give you a quick illustration, nothing to do with sport this is. For example, a client I was working with a year ago, she had an issue with going to work. That was the event. She couldn't handle going to work no more. And literally, I hate work. I can't stand work because she had one or two incidents that happened in work, and she got delusioned and demoralised. And her thoughts were, I can't do it no more. She'd stay in bed and emotionally feel nervous whenever Sunday night came along and feel anxious. And sometimes she'd just lay in bed on the Monday morning, put her head on the pillows and not face reality. That shows you what an impact it can have. Just to illustrate. So remember, it's a situation, our interpretation of the situation, which is key. Okay, and that has our thoughts, and our thoughts then are linked into physical, behaviour and feelings. So, okay, the situation could be you've got a massive game, or one of your clients, imagine one of your clients has a massive game, you've got a massive game coming up, your thoughts are going to be impacted by your beliefs about the game. Have you lost to them before? Have you beaten them before? Are you in good form? Are you in bad form? Then you have feelings. You either get nervous, okay, or you could get excited. Your behaviour could become erratic, or you become confident. Your physical could be anxious and nervous, or you could shoulders back, okay? The beauty of this model, we can work on every level. We can work on different levels. So in the case of the girl I mentioned earlier, the situation was competing in trampolining. Her beliefs about it had changed because of that event that happened. Her colleague got the leg blown up, so to speak, and that impacted her thoughts. Is it going to happen to me? What happens to me? Don't really want to do this no more anymore. Her feelings was, whenever she thought about competing, was anxious, just tightening up. Okay, her behaviour was withdrawn, and physical reactions as well would happen too. So she'd start palpitations, nervous, clammy, and all the like. So the beauty of this model is we can work on the different areas which we're going to touch on. Okay, we can work on the different areas. We can use techniques for the different areas to be able to achieve a more positive result. Anxiety. And anyone who disputes whether the mind and body are linked together, have you done an exam and you need to go for a wee? Yeah? Okay, mind body link. Enough said. So let's just go one step further into the model, which is key. I talked about the situation and our beliefs that situation being instrumental. The underlying process and force that I'm going to touch on is in between the event and our thoughts. So in between here, okay, we've got the event and our thoughts. We've got what we call schemas, and I'm going to cut the jargon to explain what a schema is. A schema is a core belief assumption. So for example, let's say you were a 5-year-old and you're in the park and you got attacked by this dog here, and 20 years later you saw the same dog in the park, not the same dog, but the same type of dog anyway. How do you think you might react? Of course, you've got an association to the dog. Unless you've dealt with it, you're going to feel potentially nervous. Well, let's say this was your dog at 5-year-old, was your best friend, used to cuddle it and all the like, and you saw it 20 years later, and saw the same sort of dog 20 years later. And then you probably go at the park, you probably go, come along and stroke it. Well, let's say you never seen a dog like that in your life before, it doesn't mean anything. So we have these core belief assumptions that are formed through experiences in our life. The structures of the way we think. Easy example, fire hot. Okay, so we also store emotional memory, which is key, and that can impact our thought process about any event. Hence, the girl I mentioned had a very strong reassociation to trampolining based on her friend or colleague blowing the leg up on a trampoline. There's a reassociation there, okay, or a belief, or whatever you want to call it, it's entirely up to you, about trampolining that's going to impact her ability to participate in the event. There's generally 3 categories of schema. We're not going to go into too much detail because time is of the essence. About self, for example, I'm not good enough, I am not good enough, that's one. It could be that others can't be trusted, or football managers or whatever, okay? Or it could be the world or the fans or whatever, really, the world out there. They're generally the three categories that we work in, but we'll sort of touch on that a little bit more as we go along. Now, just to illustrate and surmise this part of the process before we move on, to use the girl as an example. So the situation, like we mentioned, that the model was trampolining. Okay, her beliefs about trampolining had changed because it's a significant emotional event. Okay, she now felt a bad emotional memory, her thoughts, and we can't control these thoughts because we call an unconscious level, at least in the world of hypnotherapy. We call it an unconscious level, which we'll talk more about as we go along. And basically, it changed the whole thought process. And her thoughts were, what if I get injured? Fall off the trampoline. Behaviour, she became withdrawn. Emotions was anxious, nervous. Physical heart rate was pounding away. Breathing. So we looked at ways to work on different levels. So we did strategies that target her thoughts, obviously target her belief, emotions, behaviour, and physical reaction. So we're going to illustrate what we can do. But before we move forward, I want you to do the following exercise. Think about a situation in the past as affected you in some way, shape or form. It could have been you failed a driving test, it could have been you failed an exam, it could have been you were released from a football club, or it could have been that you failed at sport, whatever it is. It could have been a personal thing, you broke up from someone. And think about your thoughts at the time when that happened. Think about your thoughts at the time. And once you thought about your thoughts, your emotions, how you felt about the situation, and your behaviour, and any physical reaction. So you could be in a situation where I'm announcing professional contracts in the football team. Think about your thoughts, your beliefs about that. Had you done enough to get a contract? Your thoughts about it, your emotions, how you felt, your behaviour, and your physical reactions whilst they're going to make the announcement who got a professional contract, or whatever it is. Okay, this is a bit of illustration. You might want to do this in your own time, in your own pace. Okay, just to give you an idea going forward. So let me give you an example. Let's say you were at your sports club and the coach walked past you, he or she ignores you completely. What are your beliefs about the situation if your coach completely ignores you, who normally says hello to you? Okay, what are your beliefs? Okay, it could be he's ignoring it. It could be if they're releasing players that you're going to get released, you're not selected in the squad. Or if you're at work, you might think of making redundancies, you could be made redundant. And think about your thoughts racing, running wild at the time, and the emotions, how you feel, and your behaviour, and physical reactions as well. So you might be affected psychologically and think, well, maybe they're falling out on me, maybe they're not going to choose me for the team, and then you behave in certain ways, and then you decide to contact Jim, your resident therapist, and I say to you, okay, reevaluate your thoughts. It could be that the coach has a troubled situation. It could have been he or she had their wife or husband the night before. It could be that they got the pressure of cutting the team back and giving contracts as well as affecting them. It could be their mom was somewhere else. Maybe their job's on the line. Who knows? And then by doing that, you start seeing the situation differently. You change your perspective, change your world. And then you say, I'll speak to another player, see what he or she says, and they say the same thing. They didn't say hello to them. And then you start thinking differently. You behave differently, you feel differently. I'm not saying that it's not possible that you're going to get cut from the team. That's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible if she's not ignoring you. It's ignoring you. I'm just saying that sometimes we're our worst enemy. See the situation what it is. So if you get made redundant, you get cut from team, how you respond and the person you communicate is key going forward. Okay? Now, what we're going to do is look at ways and look at strategies to help you to be able to restructure your thought process. If what you're doing isn't working, then we can restructure it. We can restructure it, we can evaluate your beliefs and look at the impact they're having on you and your performance or your client's performance and start restructuring and rewiring the belief process, which can happen. Scientists used to say that you couldn't, the brain was formed in the very first years of one's life. Now they realise in the last 20, 30 years or so that the brain can rewire itself, neuroplasticity, we can form neural pathways in the brain, but you've got to work out. Like all things you don't work out, then it's not going to do any good to you. So to give you some examples going forward, what we can do, for those of you who already are skilled therapists and trainers and coaches, I'm going to sort of give you some examples that you can use. If you're not, then you go and read some of the stuff that I'm going to touch on tonight. If you want some resources, I've already emailed you some resources that have a lot of these strategies anyway. One of my goals is to help as many people as possibly can and to share this stuff and get it out there. If you really want the information you haven't got already, I've already emailed people who've registered for the event, I'll send it to you. But just to give you an idea of the stuff that I would do and could do, you can remove triggers. And what we mean by trigger is the situations that are causing the anxiety. That's idealistic in sport because obviously if you're going to play regularly, you can't do that. But you can still remove certain triggers that could have an impact outside the environment. And you can do that by doing a thought diary. What are my thoughts in different situations? So it could be that you remove certain situations in your life. It could be that you don't go on social media very often. It could be that you don't go to places that cause anxiety. It could be that you don't associate with people who cause anxiety. You reduce the number of your life will have a knock-on effect. So have a thought diary is quite useful to identify what are the triggers that cause the fuel that burns the fire, so to speak. To change a belief, these aren't exhaustive by the way, we just have a very short space of time and I'd like to go into much detail, but I'm sure this is enough to get you on the way. Things that we can do, which are quite useful in terms of the belief, what I've done, timeline is pretty good technique. For those of you who do timeline regression, you can remove a belief. Belief change cycle, the NLP technique is quite useful as well. We can do many strategies. We can use meta model language patterns in NLP. We can do Socratic questioning in CBT. We can generally isolate the beliefs and through various processes that are exhaustive, change them and alter the belief, change the perspective, change the world. In terms of the behavioral, emotional, physical side, what we can do is stuff like visualization, it's quite powerful, NLP anchoring, okay, or thought stopping in CBT, we can talk about that a little bit more as we go along. Mindfulness, just watching the mind, meditation, self-talk, breathing exercises as well can help us, and that can help us start rewiring the brain from a negative to a positive. These aren't exhaustive by the way, there's just a few. These are some of the stuff that I did. I mentioned the young girl I worked with earlier. What we did do, which was instrumental, we did timeline to alter to get rid of the negative emotions associated to competing. We did belief change, NLP technique. I did some Socratic questioning and meta model. We also did visualization for rehearsal and anchoring. And that really, I'm sure, helped along the way. I'm not putting down that she went away and won medals at the highest level again, just down to me. It was her that did it, I just facilitated. And I don't see myself as being anything other than a facilitator. It's her that did it, not me. And obviously she got back to winning ways like a lot of the athletes I work with have done and do. But I give you an example, an athlete, you're a coach, there are things you can look at. They're not exhaustive by the way, but they're a good start. Now, to give you an idea of how to move forward, people forward, let's just use an off-the-cuff example, okay? You're watching this evening, who likes parties? Okay? Anyone like parties? Okay, I guess some of you do like, it depends on the party. Yeah, of course it does. Okay, so some people get excited going to a party. Some people like, well, whatever, I can take leave it. And some people feel nervous, anxiety. So if you're the person who likes going to parties, is excited, and your partner doesn't like going to parties, they get very anxious, it's very difficult to sell it to them from what we call your reality. You know, you loving a party, you've got to sometimes neutralize that negativity. So if it's very anxieties, and in the case of the trampoline, first of all, rather than say, okay, get back to winning ways, you know those motivational speakers you see at those big events, come on, you can do it, you feel really pumped up, you're really pumped up for about an hour after the event, then all of a sudden, bang, you're starting to fight and you're back down again. The reason being is that it's not about and all that stuff, it's about strategically helping people move from A to B, and sometimes neutralizing the thought. So if you're nervous doing a presentation, for example, go to more neutral emotion, and then we can start building some excitement if that's the case we need to do. And now you need to use that because sometimes as a therapist we can make the mistake of seeing it from our reality. So you've got to meet the person from their reality. It's no good you trying to help someone based on your own experiences or experience. That's why sometimes some of the best coaches are people who didn't participate in the sport at the very highest level. They see it impartially without emotion. I know certain footballers who play at the very highest level make abysmal coaches. Not all of them, but some of them do, because they think every player should be able to do what they do. And that explains why some of the best managers of our generation didn't even play pro football. And people say to me, Jim, well, should you not be an expert in the field to be able to do that? I say, well, do you have to be a criminal to be a criminal psychologist? There we go. It might help if you are, yet if you're a therapist out there, as long as you are professional in your field, and sometimes a little bit of knowledge can be a lot, too much anyway. So I prefer the person to be an expert in their own field. So if you're a performance coach out there, you haven't played the sport that you're doing the performance coaching in at the highest level, it doesn't really matter, because it's probably even better you haven't. Because if you have, you start seeing it through rose-tinted glasses, and you start thinking tactics, technique, you're better off seeing it from your own. And I've certainly worked in many sports I haven't participated. I couldn't do trampolining. Well, I probably could if I wanted to, but I've got any inclination to do it. But I can help someone who is on the top of the game doing that. I've worked with many sports I didn't, well, lacrosse team years ago. I haven't played lacrosse my life. Many sports I've done this sort of stuff in. I haven't played at the highest level, athletes I haven't competed in. I, as an athlete, competed at a high level myself. Back in the day, I did pretty okay. Then in saying that, some of the people I work with, I haven't done what they have, it doesn't really matter. So don't be too deterred if you're out there and you think, well, I'm not really played the highest level. And for you guys who are watching, your therapists too, thinking, well, I know sport's my thing. It's a massive market out there. People want to perform at the highest level. Golfers, recreational sports people want to improve, and you can do a good job and help get them to where they need to. So you should be rewarded. Our thoughts, and we're going to study our thoughts shortly. The origin of your thoughts is most of the thoughts you've had yesterday, you'll have today, and most of the thoughts you've had today, you will have tomorrow. On average, we have roughly about 70,000 thoughts a day, which is a lot really, and unless you sort of make a conscious effort to start changing your thought process, you'll sort of carry on with the thoughts that you have. I'm going to quick exercise now, if you don't mind. Get a pen and paper, exercise. What I'm going to do is I'm going to blow the whistle, and every time I blow the whistle, write down the first thought that comes to mind, please. Okay, so pen and paper, please. Pen and paper. Get a pen and paper now. Okay, pen and paper. Start now. Okay, 30 seconds, and you can close your eyes if you're comfortable enough closing your eyes. Couple more. Okay. And just write the first thought that comes to mind. And the reason we did that, because most of the thoughts that you have are harmless, but we have some thoughts that are going to cause damage, especially in sport, that we're going to look at shortly. Unless we control and re-evaluate those thoughts, they're going to keep spreading like wildfire. They don't stop. The key is that we need to take a step back and see the situation and then re-evaluate the thought, which is key. We call them automatic thoughts in CBT. We'll talk more about that in a little more detail shortly. But they're generally in the part of the brain, the emotional center of the brain, the limbic system. And they're automatic. For example, ever been for a walk on a Saturday night and gone past a nice Indian restaurant or Italian or Chinese, whatever it takes, or maybe on a Friday night you go past a nice chippy, and what happens automatically? You salivate, you feel hungry, you drool, maybe not drool, and all the rest of it. And the key is that we're not in control of it. Okay? Automatic. We have an external event, and we have an automatic filtering process at a subconscious level, which we'll sort of touch on shortly. And it's in a part of the brain over here. Okay? The hippocampus is the part of the brain that generally stores emotional memory, and the irony is that the more traumatic the memory is, the higher in the hippocampus it goes. So any trauma you have in your life, please talk to someone about that. I'm not talking about sports trauma. You've been for a breakup, you're having, I do a lot of work on mental health. I'm doing a talk on mental health later this week. It's an area I'm passionate about. I don't like seeing people suffer, and go see a GP or whatever. Get some help professionally if you're suffering, because the longer you leave it, the more damage you can do psychologically. And sometimes we'll have that post-traumatic stress, and a lot of it comes from the fact that they have, at least in my interpretation in Jim's world, they haven't dealt with certain emotional trauma. And the more the trauma reason. That's the example is like when someone talks about fighting in a war 60 years after they've fought in the war and they start crying and get really upset. Or you might have broken up 20 years ago and it still affects you when you see that person, or if you ever see that person or whatever. So do you have trauma off the record, get professional help, whatever you do. Within the limbic system, we've got what we call the amygdala, and the amygdala is responsible for what we call fight, flight, freeze. Okay, so the primal instinct. Now, back in the day before my time, probably before your time as well, we used to have dangers that roamed the earth. Okay, and what we would do, we would either fight, put up the dukes, or we'd run, or we'd freeze, depending on the situation. Our primal instinct is still with us now. Okay, we still have that instinct, albeit we don't have these dangers no more. The mind can't differentiate between modern day pressures such as work or massive sporting events, and take my word for it, road rage. If you haven't had road rage, you probably have got an amygdala. Okay, we do it automatically, and generally the amygdala, the emotions that fear is one of the most powerful emotions. That the amygdala and anger and some negative emotions that automatic reactions, that part of the brain. So with the external event, the road rage, you get cut up, and then you just go crazy and get really worked up. Adrenaline response, adrenaline pumps cortisol around the body, and you start shaking, feeling nervous, and sometimes it can take up to about 4 or 5 hours. A few months ago, I had a big road accident myself on the motorway. A truck bang wiped me out. The next thing I know, I'm on the side of the embankment somewhere, and I had a course on that morning. And when they asked me if I wanted to go to the hospital, I said, no, I've got to go do a course actually. And they said, no, you've got to go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital, and it took about 4 hours for the ECG to come from 150, 160 beats per minute down to about resting heart rate, 60 or 90 beats per minute. And I knew all this stuff, and I wanted to get out of the hospital as quick as I could do, so I'm trying to hypnotise myself to relax. And actually I did do it, got out probably earlier than I should have done. I went back to work the next day, by the way, when everyone said not to do, and I went for a long drive to do an event a week later, and I use this practice what I preach really, which is key. But let's show you how to control these automatic reactions. High pressure sports can have an impact on us obviously in different ways, because it's not the sport, it's the meaning we have around the sport and around the event, which is key. And most of the thoughts, like I mentioned earlier, they're harmless, but there are ones that creep into our mind. Okay, I'm not good enough, I didn't succeed, what if I miss the penalty, what if that happens, in outside sporting world, I'm ugly, I'm useless, I'm overweight, I'm fat, whatever, just things like that really that can creep in, which can be very, very demoralising in certain situations. So self-talk is key. We've got to be able to literally be a detective and find these thoughts that are causing the negativity in our life. And if we're going to address all the automatic thoughts, you're not going to address 60,000 thoughts. The key is to decide which thoughts have gotten into the problem. What I do, I use NLP technique to do that. I use a well-formed outcome, decide what you want and what's in the way of what you want, and your thoughts around the getting from A to B. Say you want the outcome is to score a penalty, and your thoughts are negative about scoring that penalty, then we can assess those thoughts. I do what we call NLP, a well-formed outcome or a SMART goal, or whatever you do is entirely up to you. But the key is, in Jim's world, it's obviously not a problem unless it's stopping you get from A to B. If you're never going to take a penalty in your life, it's not an issue. Or if you decide that you have a fear of flying, intend on flying, it's not a problem. So I always think it's linked to an outcome. But you're not going to examine every thought. You cite to examine the ones. I'm going to touch on very briefly on cognitive distortion. So it's not a problem until it's a cognitive distortion. And we're not going to go into a lot of detail here because of time. I'm running out of time. I'm conscious that time's getting the best of us now. Now, what we mean by cognitive distortion is, one of the ways we can identify cognitive distortions is in real time, when someone's actually doing the event. If we're not doing the event and we haven't got time to log it down, we can do the imagery. We can sometimes put them in trance to relive and regress the situation. I regressed the young girl I mentioned earlier when the situation happened. Her colleague had the leg that got burst, to find out what her thoughts were at the time. And we can do role play as well. So different things we can do. It is unexhaustive to be able to listen to the actual thought process linked to the belief and the anxiety. Now, cognitive distortion, the automatic thoughts, they're generally ingrained very deep, like we mentioned, in the person's psychology. And then we have irrational, at least in the world of the therapy, it's an irrational thought. I suppose, is it irrational? Your friend blows the leg up jumping on a trampoline, you start getting afraid. I don't know. If you want to compete again, it could be a problem. So I have an issue with people saying irrational. I don't believe people are broken. I don't believe that I believe people make sense of the world in their own way. I guess in the end, all we can do is help them get from A to B, which is key. Now, Aaron Beck, one of the fathers of CBT, he was the one who came up with the theory behind cognitive distortions. David Burns, he formalised a little bit more and made it a little more popular and gave them names and labels. We're not going to go into all the labels and names this evening. As a general rule, there's in and around 15. Going forward, we'll touch on a couple, and more importantly, we'll look at ways that you can do your own research after this and look in more detail. And unless you're a therapist, you don't really need to know anyway. I don't think so anyway. The key is obviously identifying negative thought, which is more important than the actual label itself. But let me give you a scenario. Let's say, for example, you're a footballer. Okay, we'll use football as an example, and all of a sudden you've got I'm going to imagine 100,000 people are watching you at an event. So you're going to close your eyes and close your eyes. 100,000 people are watching you at an event. Professional footballer. It's the World Cup, and you put the ball down, and you've got to take a penalty. Imagine how you feel. Imagine what your thoughts are. Imagine how you physically. Okay. Now you've got players in certain situations in training they'll score 9 times out of 100. And in a game, they'll miss. You've all seen that. We've all cheered our favourite football team on and players on, and they can score 9 times out of 100 in training and then in the game. And why do you think that is? Why? Why would a player score in training and not in a game? Yeah, of course, obviously it's the meaning they attach to the situation. Okay? So if it's just a general training session, but still the same distance away, isn't it, from the keeper? Still the same distance away from the goal, I should say, as well. The key is it's our meaning, our belief about the situation. If I don't score, there's millions of people watching me around the world. The pressure is just what you put on yourself. So I always say to people, some of the work I do, just focus on the process rather than the outcome. And what I mean by that, you focus a lot on the outcome, scoring a goal, winning a trophy. It's good to a certain point, that's the outcome. But if you sort of scale back and focus on the technique, so with the goal I work with, we focus on the technique, the processes, rather than competing again. And obviously that led to winning medals again. So in football, you can focus on putting the ball down, arms up to balance, striking the ball, just technique. And that's why it's really important to get a very solid technique. That's why the best performers in the world have got a really, really good technique. There's a lot of pressure that goes to what we call tight before they ever had any experience in the field. They've got a very solid foundation, which is key. A couple of distortions that we'll touch on are catastrophizing. Always imagine the worst scenario. In the case of the goal, what if I get injured and I blow my leg up, whatever? What if I miss? So one of the distortions are catastrophizing. Just to illustrate, there's many others. We'll touch on a couple. I'm just going to touch on the ones that the girl had for now, and you can do your own research going forward. Overgeneralizing, always mess up. So you could, for example, and we'll go back to this one here. So catastrophizing, what if I blow my leg up? The chances are she's never blown my leg up before. No one ever has before, or not as far as I'm aware. There's a very, very small chance. So it is over catastrophizing, isn't it? So the other person is afraid of flying, and you tell them that flying is more safe than driving a car. You might say that, but in their world, it's what they believe to be true in their reality, isn't it? Okay? So that's the key, is to help them examine the negative thought, the cognitive distortion, to go forward. We're going to address that. Overgeneralizing, always mess up. So for example, you might have scored penalties at 101 and you miss one, and you focus on the one that you overgeneralize. Oh, you could overgeneralize. I'm going to let the whole world down if I miss this penalty. Things like that, really. Overgeneralizing. Okay, you focus on in basketball, you always mess up on the free throw line. You might have messed up twice in 100 times. Okay, mental filter, what you focus on. You might have played 20 good games out of 25 in the season. You focus on the 5 ones that didn't play up to par. Mental filter, what you focus on. What she was focusing on was the one isolated event, not the fact that she'd done those techniques maybe 10,000 times and never had any issue and did it successfully. And they're key things. There's just a few cognitive distortions we're going to touch on. Like I mentioned, there is others, and you can read up on them. But to give you an example, all a cognitive distortion is the automatic thought that is affecting us really achieving the outcome. And that's in Jim's world in terms of helping people. So understanding the cognitive thought cognitive distortions is say we're going to identify, we're going to look at alternatives, what's a better way of seeing it. Okay? So identify, and then we can identify the distorted sense of reality, and then we can start getting more control of our thought process. And we can do that by having a thought diary. If you're an athlete, have a thought diary. We have a food diary, a thought diary as well, how you feel throughout the week, and how you react throughout the week, and what happens during games, or if you've got clients, have a thought diary. Do this exercise here, perspective exercises. Take a situation and look at it 5 different ways, and that starts rewiring the brain. So for example, you've got a big event coming up, how can you see it differently? So it could be you've got a penalty coming up and you feel really nervous, anxious, how can you see it differently? So it could be an opportunity to make a name for yourself, it could be an opportunity to go out and express yourself, what you've done all your life and trained for. So for example, in real life you could have a breakup, and how can you look at it 5 different ways? Well, maybe it's an opportunity for you to go out and find someone who wants to be with you. Maybe it's an opportunity to go away and learn new things, to travel the world. Without sounding patronising, if we stay where we are, we'll keep getting what we've got. When we move forward, we'll see it differently. So you can do this exercise with clients yourself, and that starts rewiring the brain. Okay, 5 different ways, or as many as you want, even one way if you can. It's entirely up to you. And we start to develop more conducive thoughts of the outcomes that we want, which is key. Beliefs are your reality, and very rarely do we question these distortions. Very rarely they just float in our mind for a lifetime without stopping to think, actually, you know what, I'm going to question this distortion. And if it's in the way of what you want, you've got to identify it. Identify if it's working. These distortions in Jim's world are like hurdles. Unless you identify the hurdle, then you are going to crash into it. Okay, identify the hurdle. It's like trying to run over hurdles blind, with a blindfold, I should say. Okay, it's going to be a lot more challenging. What we need to do is see it for what it is, and then jump over the actual hurdle, reevaluate it. Okay, self-awareness is key to all of it. So be aware of your thoughts, and we don't spend enough time being self-aware in the world that we live in. So take a moment now to do a next exercise. So close your eyes and just observe your thought process. So as an athlete, you can do this as well. Observe your thought process and relive the situation where you competed in an event. We can guide your clients to do that, and observe your thoughts like flowing down a river. And imagine your thoughts just flowing down a river. Okay? And then what you can do while you're doing that, and come back to the here and now, because of time, decide what's helpful, write it down, because not all of the thoughts are going to be negative, some are going to be quite useful, and decide what's not good. And what I do, I have a process where if the thought's not useful, then scrumple it up and throw it in the bin. Get rid of it. Okay? Metaphorically, it's key. But you've got to assess your thoughts or deal with it. Which something else we're going to cover shortly. Self-talk is key. Technique for you, I said it's going to be interactive. I'm going to give you some stuff to take away. Okay, be mindful what you say. You spoke to your friends the same way you spoke to yourself. You have no friends. So once you've done the awareness exercise, write down statements that are negative and turn them into positive. When I mean very positive, I mean by positive what you want. So for example, it could be even technique. So you're doing a penalty, it might be okay, arms out for balance, head down, and drive through the ball. So it could be talking through a technique, which is key. Or it just could be, for example, you say, okay, I always fail, and you can talk about, okay, I might have failed in the past, but that's took me to where I am now, and I'm better. An example, years ago, I used to do training for coaches in football, and you see the coaches shout at the sideline, don't lose the ball! And what do you think would happen to the player when he said don't lose the ball? They'd do exactly what the coach told them not to do. The mind can't process negative instruction. If I said I don't think it would blue giraffe, what do you think about? So the key is to say keep possession. A bit like the personal trainer, if you've been in the gym, who says to you on the rowing machine, don't bend your back, don't bend your knees, and you do exactly that, tell you, it's better keep your back straight, what you want the person to do. So take time to do this exercise. Write down all your negative statements and turn them into a positive statement. What you want to happen, okay? If you get a chance to do that, do that. Tell the negative committee in your mind to shut down, okay? Imagine silencing the actual thought itself, turn the volume down. What do you do in the car when you like a song? You turn a different channel, you turn the radio off, or the CD or MP3 off. You do it with your mind as well, okay? Turn the sound down. One quote by the guru Tony Robbins, I've been to many of his seminars over many years, read many books, you probably have as well. And he talks about identifying your problems and focus on solutions. A lot of the time in the world that we live in, we identify a problem and state the problem, and we complain about the problem. The more you complain about a problem, the more magnified it becomes. Some people think talking about a problem is solving it. My philosophy, Jim's philosophy, is identify the problem and then spend 90% looking for a solution to the problem. I'm not saying the world's, perfect. It's far from being perfect. But what I am saying is that if you stay in that rut, then obviously you're going to get more of what you focus on. So focus on solution. The process I use, I call it the part process, is record your thought, rationalize it, and what I call rewiring it. Okay, and one way you can do that is another technique you use going forward is record whatever. Now, when I say rationalize it, for the therapists in the group, the rationality, we talk about what type of thought is, like earlier we talked about what type of cognitive distortions is. It could be mental filter, it could be fortune telling, it could be catastrophizing. As a therapist, CBT therapist, you would label it if you wanted to. You could do, you probably should do really. In saying that if you're not a therapist, it doesn't really matter. Don't get too hung up on all those labels. Words are just labels. Okay, the key is obviously the thought that's causing you any issues. And one thing you can do is ask yourself, is it true? Examine the evidence. So I'm hopeless, I'll never learn to be able to, I'll never make that team. Is it true? Just because you've been released with one team doesn't mean other teams will release you. Could have been circumstance. I'm hopeless, I'm useless, well. Examine the evidence. What's the evidence? Maybe someone's told you never make it. Okay, plenty of people out there have been told they won't be successful, they've gone to do really well, plenty of sports stuff. So examine the evidence. How is these thoughts ridiculous, absurd? Ask the question. Okay, what will ultimately cost you if you don't let go of these thoughts and beliefs? So these are some questions you can ask. Okay, if you want, I can email you the slide, so you've got them. Okay, example might be the trampoline situation. Record the thought. What if I burst my leg? Is it true? Examine the evidence. How many times have you done these trampolining techniques in the past? Thousands of times. Okay, and I've been fine. How is this ridiculous? Well, I've done it thousands of times. I've been fine. I'm professional. Okay, and if I don't let go, what's it going to cost you? Well, I won't go on to compete at the highest level and win medals, and I want to do that. I'm using the goal as an example again. Okay, and rewire it differently. How can I see it now? Well, it happened. It was very sad for it that it happened. Yet, in saying that, going forward, I'm very talented at what I do, and I can go on and do really well. And I'm sure the person that happened to would want me to do really well. So, a different way of seeing it, rewiring it. Okay, which is key. So, we're going to neutralise the thought process first of all, not go from total sadness, anxiety to jumping in the air. Yay! It's just taking it one step at a time. Okay, it's not what happens to you, it's how you react to it, which is key. And that's what really matters. Okay, so CBT therapy, all this sort of stuff has been happening for thousands of years anyway. It's nothing new. Philosophical people have used these processes for many years. Your reaction, so you missed the penalty, what do? We've seen many of sports people who react in different ways. Some people aren't even as talented as other people, but what they do is they keep going. I had a client of mine once, he got released from a football team and he went on to go to university in the States and do a degree, and he's got a great job, he's doing really well. So the key is how we react to certain situations is key. What do? Okay, things that happen in life anyway, it's your reaction. So you miss a goal, miss a penalty, all the fans on your back, okay, you lose your contract, what do you do about it? Okay, so one of the techniques we can use really powerful is mental and visual rehearsal. I use this a lot with the players I work with, my stable of footballers and athletes who see me regularly. We do a lot of this stuff. We'll visualise fixture lists, games, playing against different players, permutations. Is it going to be hot? Is it going to be whatever the weather's going to be? We visualise many permutations, the size of the player, different players, and the environment. The more familiar your mind is to the situation, the more chance of success you're going to have. I'm not saying visualising the key and the be-all end-all. It gives you a better chance to succeed. Which is key. And imagination is more powerful than knowledge. Sometimes we can do ourselves a disservice and be our own worst enemy. Okay, I'm going to show how powerful it is. What I want you to do, if you've got someone with you watching the seminar, if you haven't, you can do it afterwards, but think of a traumatic situation, mildly traumatic, put your arms out and get someone to push against your arms. and just see how you feel. If you haven't got someone to work with you now, do it later. Go to someone in the house and say, close your eyes, and if you've got an experience, get someone to push against your arms. And you'll see your arms go down a lot easier than if you think of a positive experience and you put your arms up. So do the exercise later. If you've got someone now, go to a negative experience, get someone to push against your arms, or try and lift a weight for that matter, and see how you feel, and then just give yourself a bit of a loosener and do it again. And just see how much stronger you are physically, mind-body link. The more, I every morning write a gratitude list, and the gratitude list helps me set myself up for the day. I start with a positive emotion, because the more we flood ourselves with positive emotions, the stronger we are physically and mentally, and the more we vibrate on a different frequency of energy, and we draw better stuff in our life, which is key. And you can do this exercise now, by the way, if you want to. Okay, what I want to do is just bring your arms in this position. Okay, bring your arms in this position here, please. Okay, what we want to do is go backwards. Keep your legs facing the wall that way. Bring your arms out and go back as far as you can, and point a spot in the wall. Okay, and now just shake your arms. Remember, facing a wall, arms out, go as far back as you can. See where your hand is and mark that spot on the wall. Now just shake. Okay, shake it off. Okay, this time round, what I want to do is closing your eyes. Imagine going back and further back to further than the last point you went before. Imagine going further back, and now start going further back, your eyes closed, and go back. Now open your eyes and see where you are. Okay, you'll be a lot further than the first time you did it. And the reason being, you build a pathway in your mind. You know the physical trainers in the audience, so you're not going to physiologically change in that space of time. You're building a pathway in the brain, which is key. Neural pathways in the brain. That's how we rewire our brain. Okay, they did a basketball study in America years ago. I read it out. They took 3 groups of players. They did free throw line practice, and one group practiced physically, the other group practiced visually, mental rehearsal. The other group didn't practice at all. The group that practiced visualizing the shots improved more than the group that practiced physically, and the group that didn't practice went backwards. So it shows, okay, every structure we have in the world will be in someone's mind. Your iPhones, the planes you fly in when you go on holiday, all these things would have been in someone's imagination. Imagination is power. Okay, the key to visualization, which is key, I'm going to go into as much as I can, is to focus on the process rather than the outcome. Decide the outcome, whatever the outcome is. It could be the technique, it could be striking the ball, throwing a free line, baseball, hitting a home run, whatever it is. It could be a serve, that's the outcome, doing an ace, whatever. It could be winning the league, whatever the outcome is, it's entirely up to you. Then you write a script. So if it's for a game situation, write a script of how you want the game to go. And what I mean by the game to go, not very Hollywood, it's just how you want it to go. Close down, press, whatever it is you're going to do tactically. So speak to your coach what the coach wants you to do tactically or technically, which is key. The more better it is with the coach, the better it is. If you in team sport, understand and define, okay, and then you can visualize the process. So if he wants you to close, or she wants to close a person down, then you can visualize the way you're going to play the game. If they want to run up and down wing, put crosses in, you visualize it. Okay, if there's a technique like the trampoline, tumble, whatever, then you visualize it. The key is the process, because if you focus on the outcome, you're going to just overwhelm yourself. I've helped people do presentations, interviews, get jobs, pass physical training situations, and we've done it through focusing on the process. Okay, and what we do, you write your script, then you imagine watching yourself on a screen, okay, that's associated, and see what you see, sounds, colours, and imagine stepping into it and living it, and think of as many scenarios as you can to embed it unconsciously. We'll have a quick go if you want to. Now, okay, so think of an outcome you want to achieve. It could be presenting, it could be an interview, it could be technically striking a ball, it could be playing a game, and then just close your eyes and just develop a script in your mind. If you want to write the script down, not close your eyes, it's entirely up to you. I know times you have the answers, you can do it later, but write a script. okay, exactly where you want it to go. So it could be, let's just do a technique if you want to, because time, we probably won't get time for the actual game, but you can go away from here, speak to your coach about what your role is to move forward. We could observe a player on TV or performer on TV and just write down the technique if you want to. If it's football, out the balance, alongside the ball, tennis, ball in, whatever, really, it's entirely up to you. And once you've done that, just close your eyes and see yourself doing it on TV. Notice what you see, what you hear, what you feel, because we process through our senses, and then imagine stepping into it, and then living it in the here and now, and just going through it, thinking of three scenarios, using the technique. Okay, that's only one of the ways to do the visualization process. I've emailed it to you if you've registered for the event. If you haven't, I can email you this, as well as a DVD that I go through the process entirely with a professional, a footballer, an athlete. Okay, quick demonstration of how powerful it is. Of all the athletes that I've done this process with, a few years ago, there's a lad that was struggling with Osgood ladders. Okay, if you're watching, Jay, I just mentioned you because you're phenomenal the way you sort of turn things around. He has Osgood ladders, disease condition of the knees. I'm not going to go into too much detail because of the time, and I'm not a medical expert, but his dad found me out because I worked with one of his colleagues who played for Macclesfield, and basically he had this condition, Osgood ladders, and I don't think he really got into psychology anyway, but he didn't really have a choice because he couldn't train as much as he wanted to train. And what we did got to visualise a lot of the stuff that he was going to do, because obviously he couldn't train and the rest of his knees because his knees would flare up. So we visualised himself heading the ball, striking the ball, playing. And when it came to a point where they gave contracts in the final year, because condition really flared up when he was about 17, I think he was, and he really couldn't play or train very often, I suggested he speak to the physio and do stuff that he can do to keep ticking over, maybe upper body stuff, swimming if possible, whatever really he could do to keep going, but do visualisation of technique and game. Came to give him the contracts, he got a professional contract. That might be a big deal for a lot of the professional contract, but to think that he had Osgood ladders and it really affected him, I believe, in the most way on his final year of doing his apprenticeship before the contract was given out, shows how powerful this stuff is really. So I don't know where he's playing now, wherever you are, I hope you're doing well, but the fact is that he got the contract. I'm not just putting it down to me, but I'm sure that it really helped him go a long way, just to rehearse, okay, the technique which you couldn't do physically because of the condition at the time. And the secret is to focus on your energy in building the new rather than focusing on the old. Out of the old, in the new is what I say. And obviously, Socrates, you're in good company going forward. So I wouldn't get too hung up about the past and the past. Go forward. We did that with James. Go forward. A lot of my clients, we go forward. I had a guy who did a talk for me recently. Adrian Dada should be watching, the top man. Known this guy for a few years now. He's come boy NLP courses. You can watch the video of the event. The guy who he just phenomenal story. If you get a chance to watch him. Paralympic athlete, won gold and silver, and he watch the video. He'll explain it better than what I can. He had this condition that debilitated him in terms of his ability physically. Yet in saying that, his reaction wasn't to dwell on what had happened. Obviously, his period of no doubt would have been disillusioned. Fit, healthy guy. Literally, in the space of a week, he's being told that he's not going to survive. And then he ends up not being able to walk, but he turns his attention to compete in fencing at the Paralympics, and really inspiring story. If you're watching your top man, and I advise anyone to watch the story, upload it on YouTube, phenomenal, and that's a perfect example of someone focusing on rebuilding anew, never look back. And if you're watching it, Adrian, you're an absolute inspiration, mate, and I would advise anyone to watch what you've got to say, because you are the man. Not that I want to compare, we should compare others, but sometimes you have a bad day and you think, you know what, people like yourself restore my faith in humanity, mate. And these days, he's going out there doing talks in schools about hate crime, just phenomenal guy, okay? And if you're out there, it's one of Steve Jobs, I'm going to sort of just draw the seminar to the end. It's the ones who are crazy enough to go out there and do it, that do. A lot of people out there, if you're a therapist, and a lot of people ask me, Jim, how do I get into sports and that sort of stuff, really, you've got to get out there and do it. You just got to get out there and be proactive and believe in yourself, and you just never know who that client might be to go on and do well. I've been very fortunate. I've worked with many footballers and sports people for many years. in probably 20-year period now. And the key to all of it, and what I'll say, is to put yourself on the line, get out there, work at amateur level, never be too big for your boots, always stay humble. I'll work with anybody, any stage. I work with some of the best athletes in the world, but I'll also go and help young people do talks in schools and do my bit really as much as I can do. I'm passionate about moving things forward. One of the reasons why, for those of you who know me from football, I left football, guys, is because whilst I love the game, I still work with some of you guys. I look at the bigger picture. I want to get out there and do this stuff on a massive scale, to do something special in the world and help people in the world. That can be very challenging and all the rest of it, but I don't want to go into too much detail now anyway. That's just only my story. And proximity is really important too. Just be mindful of who you hang around. You're going to get people who are going to sort of peck your head and tell you can't do it. If anyone says you can't do it, they're generally envious, and they're the ones that don't believe they can do it and they want to project onto you. I always have a saying that always assess the person saying what you can and can't do to see if they've got credibility. And you'll find that who go and achieve great things are the ones who will build you up and encourage you. So proximity is power, and your network is your net worth. Surround yourself around people who encourage you and are there for you, and do the same for them. I've really enjoyed this evening's seminar. I'm sure you've enjoyed it as well and taken a lot out of it. If you want to follow me on social media, you're more than welcome to join up. I put loads of resources out there. I'm on your Facebook, your Twitters. You can email me at info@nlp.com. Any notes you want. If you missed out on the notes for tonight's seminar, I'll fire them across to you. If you haven't got them, I'm more than happy to fire them across to you, where you can watch the seminar again, or we've got many other videos and resources you can use. My passion is helping people. My passion is to be able to go out there and make a difference in the world that we live in. And I truly believe that life is about going out there and doing the very best you can and helping people. That's the key to all of it. And I put this seminar on. There's a lot of people out there asking me the question all the time: how do you get into sport? What do you do? There's only so many hours in a day, and I want to reach as many people as I can. I'm giving you an insight on techniques you can use, how you can use them. If I can help in any way, I'm more than happy to help, because I believe we're all family in the world. If you treat people like you would treat your own family, the world will become a better place. So it doesn't matter where you're from, what you do, or where you live, we're all one big community, and I think that we should all look out for each other in some way, shape or form. And let's leave the competition in the sporting field and enjoy it and do the very best that we can. So thanks again, and have a fantastic evening wherever you are in the world. Till next time, love and light and gratitude.